right, we are starting on slide 10 now. And we were going to be working with rectangles and squares, which are probably the most common shapes that we're going over because you have seen rectangles and squares your whole life. Now, a rectangle is technically a parallelogram. So it still has those first 5 properties, that opposite sides are congruent. We're just going to fill them in really quick. Opposite sides are parallel. Opposite angles are congruent. Consecutive angles are still supplementary. And the diagonals bisect each other. But rectangles have, again, just like the rhombus did, rectangles have special properties that kind of are more specific than some of those. And so what makes this a rectangle? It has 4 right angles. When you draw a rectangle, you always have 4 right angles. And then the other thing that makes this a rectangle, the diagonals are now completely congruent. So this entire line is congruent to this entire line. Because they bisect each other, they still do cut each other in half, but now because they're congruent, all 4 of these pieces are congruent now, which is different. And again, we still have those parallelogram properties that say this side is congruent to this side. This side is still congruent to this side, okay? All right, let's solve a couple problems. Is this a rectangle? All right, so all the information they gave me, they told me that from Q to P is 97, and from P to T is 100. Now look back at our picture. These are all those diagonal pieces, they're congruent. So congruent means equal. 97 and 100 are not equal. So this is not a rectangle. They would have to be equal for it to be a rectangle. So here they gave me a problem. It says F to G is 7B. So let's label that. F to G is 7B. And F to J is B plus 42. What is the value of B? All right, well, we just talked about how these pieces of the diagonal are equal. They're congruent. So to solve this, I'm going to set them equal or congruent. 6B is 42, so B is 7. Okay. All right, and then last we have a square. You know a square is a shape that has 4 congruent sides. In fact, a square is, this is its actual definition, it is a parallelogram with properties of a rhombus and a rectangle. So all the things we've learned in these videos apply to a square. So we are going to fill in every single property we've seen, that opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent, opposite angles are congruent, consecutive angles are still supplementary, and diagonals bisect each other. Now, all of those came because it is a parallelogram. The next 2 pieces, that 4, let's see, let's get them in the right order. We've got all the properties here. All right, the next ones are from the rectangle. 4 right angles. And the diagonals are congruent. Those came from the rectangle. And then the last 3 came from a rhombus. 4 congruent sides diagonals are perpendicular, and diagonals bisect opposite angles. Now, if we put all these things together and label what's important on this picture, it is important to know that all four of these sides in a square are congruent. Okay. It's important to know that we have 90-degree angles in the middle where our diagonals meet. A square has 4 right angles. Like this entire angle is a right angle. But also the diagonal is cutting that angle in half. So in every single square, we know that each of these little angles is 45 degrees exactly. All right, the whole thing's 90, but each of the pieces is 45. And then last, we know that the diagonals are congruent and they bisect each other. So just like a rectangle, each of these pieces, each of those halves of the diagonal are congruent. So we know a lot about every single square. So first thing, is this parallelogram a square? They told me I have 90-degree angle in the middle, and they told me that each of these pieces of the diagonal is congruent. Well, if you look back at your picture, that's exactly what we just drew in, right? 90-degree angles in the middle, and that each of those pieces of the diagonal is congruent. So yes, this is a square. All right, now it's back to telling me this is a square, and it wants to know, this time it's asking how long XY is. They haven't asked me that yet, not in any of our problems. It's going to be a little trickier. So to find out how long XY is, we first need to solve for A. So they told us 2 sides, YZ and ZW. And I know that in a square, every side is congruent. And if it's congruent, we set it equal. So we set equal both of those sides and solve for A. Okay. Now that's not the answer because they didn't say what is A. They said how long is XY. They didn't write anything on XY, but remember, every side is the same. So if I were to plug in 29 for A in either of these places, I can do both just to make sure. If I did 3 times 29, because it's 3A, then I'm going to get I'm going to get 87, because that's side length. And if I were to plug in 29 at this A, I'm also going to get 87 as that side length. So that means in a square, every side of this square is 87. Because a square has 4 congruent sides. So if they're asking me how long XY is 87. If I can find any side length in a square, I know how long they all are because it's congruent. Okay. All right, and that was it. That's it for rectangles and squares. These problems, again, in every single one of these, now that you've done all the videos and done all the slides, these all came from IXL. I keep repeating that. So if you need to go back and kind of match up a problem like we did, you can look back at the video, but you can also ask me for help in tutoring or in class time. That's what I'm here for, so that you can get all this submitted this week and so that you can get your extra credit and get your grade up. So remember, after you've completed the 3 IXLs, you need to submit your digital interactive notebook that we just filled out in these videos. And then there's a Canvas assignment you can work on to start adding points to missing assignments or low test grades, right?